Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. We're going to have an interesting conversation about electromagnetic impulses today. And don't turn off your show just because of the word. It's way more interesting than you might imagine, because this is a big potential risk that we all face as human beings. I'm going to speak with at least two friends who are in very different parts of the world, and maybe a third guy will join us, but he's not shown up so far. William Forston is a professor of history at Montreat College in Montreat, North Carolina. He has a doctorate from Purdue University with a specialization in military history and technology. And he is the author of more than 50 books. Is that right, Bill?
Yes, ma'am.
Really?
Well, writing books is sort of like pistachio nuts. Did you ever eat one away? You always go back and get another and another and another. Uh, so I just started writing books and didn't stop for 40 years.
Well, I've written a lot, but there are not that many different titles. Holy smoke. Anyway, good for you. And I'll have to check out some of these books. Okay, so let's move on and go to Australia, where our next speaker we've routed him out of bed early in the morning. I think
Mhm.
he just had his morning tea and he's ready for us. And this is John Hallam, who is a big time peace activist in Australia. He's a founder of the People for Nuclear Disarmament. He was born in the UK and has been a full time activist since 1977. I knew because of his, I don't know how I know it, but when I got the invitation or the idea of asking Professor Forster to give a talk about EMP, I knew immediately who else should be on the show with him, and that's John Hallam, because I know John has been very concerned about that issue for a long time. Electromagnetic pulse weapons are weapons designed to disrupt or damage electronic equipment through the emission of high energy electromagnetic fields. And I'm not going to try to explain that myself. I'm a sociologist, not a scientist. So I'm going to ask Bill, if I may call you that, to
Absolutely.
to come right ahead and give us a little idea of. I mentioned that I knew a little bit about the Carrington effect, and which is related to the weaponry, but I think
Mhm.
you're a specialist on the weaponry. But start at the beginning and tell us why we should care if there's such a thing as a magnetic pulse. Well, about
Gosh.
this.
Okay, I'm glad we have a little time here. I must approach peace, activism, and relationship and war from a different perspective. Tragically, throughout human history, when somebody develops a new weapon system during a time of peace, they'll usually deploy it right at the start of another war. Longbows back in medieval England, German tanks in World War II, and now nuclear weapons. It's been 80 years since a nuclear weapon has been used in time of war. Does that mean it's never going to happen? So let's go to EMP. EMP stands for electromagnetic pulse weapon. It is created by taking a nuclear warhead, relatively small, 40 to 60 kiloton, about 3 to 4 times the size of a Hiroshima bomb. Put it on top of an ICBM, launch it into space, and you don't need to have precision guidance and all that. But in a worst case scenario for the United States or Canada would be to launch such a weapon, have it coasting over Chicago, 200 miles up, and you detonate it. At the instant of detonation, it sets up something called a Compton effect. In some ways, a bit like the Carrington effect. This cascades down to the Earth's surface, hits all of our electrical wiring, which are now antenna, feed it into the electrical grid, blows the power system out, blows the power stations out, blows out the high tension lines, and 1 second later, everything starts to go dark. A worst case scenario, using 3 such weapons, eastern, central, western United States. So you don't need a large nuclear stockpile, as we used to think in the past with mutual assured destruction. All you need is a couple. That's the scary thing. A rogue state, a third world country,
Excuse
just
me,
has to acquire
let
a
me make
couple.
sure I understand why. Because you're saying that these weapons have a more discrete area of impact. It's not the whole continent that's going to be affected the way a Carrington effect would, but it's a couple of 100 miles, maybe something like that.
Couple hundred miles. It doesn't have to come back into the Earth's atmosphere and hit a city, which is usually the way we think about nuclear war. This is you just detonate it 200 miles above the Earth's surface. And that sets up a cone of destruction called the Compton effect, which as it hits the Earth's surface, sets up an electrostatic discharge, a bit like if a lightning bolt hit next to your house. Suddenly everything starts blowing offline. This is a terrifying scenario because a number of studies have shown maybe upwards of 80 to 90% of the population of America, Canada, would be not only taken offline, but would die within a year because of the loss of all our different systems. I call it a Maslow's hierarchy of need for the nuclear age. Remember the old Maslow's hierarchy of need well, you're in Toronto right now, correct?
Right.
Where'd you get your water this morning?
Beats me. I don't know. Maybe.
Exactly. A magical faucet worked. It worked yesterday. It worked today. It's going to work tomorrow. Well, if the pumping stations for water are down, you've lost your water. And it goes like this. You lose your water, you lose your food supply. Within 20 days, the average town and city, its food supplies are going to start running out. You lose command and control. You lose your hospitals. Bad guys might start looting. Disease starts to break out because, okay, let's say you can still flush the toilet. It goes to a pumping station, but the purification systems are gone. So it's just dumped into the river. All these different things together cascade into an absolute calamity for civilization. So that's it in short.
Well, that's a cheery start. Let's see what
Oh,
else
yes.
we can find.
And we're going to have
Well,
barking here.
I might be able to add some more good cheer to this. Actually, what you've outlined is almost exactly identical to what I would have outlined
Yes.
if I had started. I perhaps would have asked a slightly provocative question at the beginning. How many nuclear warheads do I need to completely eliminate contemporary capitalist civilization? And I think it could be done with as few as 5. 7 would be more than ample. And according to my understanding, 1 warhead for the entire continental United States ought to be enough. And then you have your warheads need to be optimized for the production of gamma rays.
Right.
Because the gamma rays strip the electrons off the atom in the...
Back up, because I've lost you. I assumed that this warhead that you're going to drop 200 miles up is not a nuclear warhead, but a very specialized kind of weapon. It's not nuclear.
It is a nuclear warhead which is optimized for the production of gamma rays. And the reason it's got to be optimized for the production of gamma rays is because the gamma rays strip the electrons off the atoms in the most rarefied outer layers of the atmosphere, which then spiral down magnetic lines of force in a way that I can't hope to get my head around. and ultimately short out any electrical or electronic equipment that happens to be unlucky enough to be in their way, unless that equipment is shielded. Now, it is not technically difficult to shield equipment. All you've got to do is sheathe it in metal and earth it, but it is not done. And the way our physical systems are set up, they are incredibly vulnerable either to an electromagnetic pulse strike. And I would point out that the United States, China, and Russia all, not to mention the DPRK, all uniformly envisage the opening gambit of World War III to be an EMP strike. So your first indication that civilization is about to end would be that suddenly nothing works. The lights are out, the internet is down. You can't go around the corner and get money out of the ATM from your bank account. And anyway, the global banking system no longer exists, etc.
I have done hundreds of interviews across the years. You're the first person to really say it all right. It's a pleasure meeting you. Really, I've done hundreds of interviews. Usually I do a primer, and nobody knows about the gamma ray situation. Ma'am, this guy is great.
I have a bachelor's degree in history and philosophy.
Well, it's a pleasure talking
but
with you.
I did do a paper for the United Nations on electromagnetic pulse with a whole panel of experts.
Now,
Wow.
look here. I don't want to jump.
I mean, the other thing that sort of troubles me about this issue, and Aaron might be able to cast a bit more light on it, is that on the whole, the disarmament movement, whilst it has grabbed the issue of nuclear winter, has tended to shun the issue of electromagnetic pulse.
Yes.
And has tended to say, oh, that's the province of some right-wing lunatics.
Right.
Now, I know that Aaron does not fall into that camp, and that's why it is a tragedy that Aaron's not here with us now. But this is something that I think needs to change. Electromagnetic pulse needs to be talked about by the disarmament movement, not only as an issue that is absolutely integral to any concern about nuclear war, but also for what it shows us about the inherent vulnerabilities of our high-tech society, even absent a nuclear war.
Wow. I got to take my breath for a second here. You know,
I want to ask whether or not this is something that maybe the reason people don't want to talk about it is that it may be very difficult to fix or prevent.
No.
Are there really easy?
It's so hard to prevent. If an EMP event had happened in the 1980s, there were at least certain emergency backup systems and certainly military systems that were heavily EMP protected and would probably have continued to work. Those systems have subsequently been routed through Marbell and AT&T and are no longer protected. And in fact, the whole reason why someone like Kim Jong-un might decide to do an EMP strike is because he would be betting that the US would be unable to transmit a retaliatory order.
Wow. Okay, I wrote a novel. That's how I tried to reach the public, to write a character-driven novel about an EMP in a small town in North Carolina. And to your point about North Korea, at the very end of the book, my main character, a year after an EMP, is talking with an army officer, and the army officer says, "Oh, we flattened North Korea." And he just stands there numb and says, "Does that change things for me and my family who are now dead?" It's over with. It's over with. An EMP, the military term is asymmetrical first strike. All you need is 1 to 3 from an unstable state, launches it, detonates them, and it doesn't matter what happens afterwards because the whole capitalist system is going to start to collapse because it's a vacuum where America is. If you really want to do it, put one up over Europe as well. 4 weapons.
Yeah, you'd put one up. You would put one over the United States, one over Europe, and one over Eurasia, which would knock out China and Japan.
Right.
And maybe one over Australia if you want to bother.
Look, I think we need to back up a little bit because I think the average person is going to be already pretty
Right.
baffled. I think, let's see in plain English if you guys can explain how this whole thing works. And I think I want you to start with the notion of regular EMP events like the Carrington event, which you need to explain, and then how this weapon is built using the principles that are involved. But give me a little bit more of a scenario on what actually happened that could just Mother Nature herself, and in the guise of our lovely sun, can send radiation to us that will knock out our electric grid and a bunch of other things. Tell me about the natural things that might happen, and then how that's connected with this.
Well, do you want to go with the Carrington event first?
Yeah, sir, I'm deferring to you. I'm in awe of you. So,
Oh God. Well, don't be. I was in awe of you. No. Look. Go with the Carrington event, and because you've probably got more detail on it than I have.
first of all, you definitely need a nuclear weapon, an atomic bomb, an old-fashioned fission bomb, to create an EMP because, as the gentleman just said, it's the gamma ray burst that sets it up. Nuclear weapon lets off heat, light, X-ray, a couple things. It's gamma rays. Now let's go to the sun. In 1859, an astronomer named Carrington, based in London, observed a massive solar explosion through a telescope. I believe he even photographed it. And a couple of days later, the Victorian internet started to go offline. Telegraphy stations started to catch on fire. The burst was so intense that railroad tracks, the iron rails, were causing the ties to burst into flames here in America, but also in Europe. This became known as the Carrington event because of the particular astronomer. How often does this happen? We really don't know. It's been, 160 years? We've been lucky. It could happen tomorrow. 2 years ago, a good friend of mine, Peter Pry, who I don't know if you ever spoke with him, he was a big expert on this. We were talking about this and pointed out that if this solar flare, this massive solar flare, had blown off the sun 2 days earlier, we would have been smack dead center on target to be hit for what would have been a major Carrington event. It's triggered by solar flares. The electronic distribution, it's a bit different than a weapon, but it creates the same effect. When was the last time you had northern lights in Canada?
Oh, not long ago, but I didn't see them. I missed it.
That's a solar flare.
Yeah.
It's a solar flare triggers that. And the more intense the solar flare, the further south it can go. The Carrington event in 1859, they were observing northern lights as far south as the British Virgins. They said they were so bright you could actually read a newspaper from them. A very intense solar flare will create a large electromagnetic disturbance of the Earth's atmosphere and can produce some of the same effects as a nuclear weapon. In fact, catastrophically, if large enough, would actually be a global effect for everything about 30 to 40 degrees north and south of the equator. The further north from the equator you get, the more intense it gets. Sir, what are you going to add?
Well, I think you've really said everything. I understand that the guesstimated period of a major solar mass ejection is around 150 years.
Mm-hmm.
So we're kind of overdue for one. However, I do recall that there was one a couple of years back, and the Earth just didn't happen to be in quite the right place for us to cop the full effect of it.
Right.
So I think there's a slight difference between what you get from a series of nuclear weapons exploding in space and a solar mass ejection, in that the effect of the solar mass ejection continues for roughly a 24-hour period, and that its primary effect is to create massive current surges along long power lines, so that the main transformers at the at each end blow up, and those transformers are really, really, really hard to replace. Nonetheless, it would have a similar effect to the fabric of high-tech electronic civilization, to what a nuclear explosion would have. A nuclear explosion is more a nanosecond spike.
Right. 1 second.
In gamma ray production, and therefore a nanosecond spike in of electromagnetic pulse. So it's a single short, sharp shock, but the effect is much the same. And I understand that there is also a delayed effect, and an even more delayed effect, which is more like the Carrington effect. So there are sort of 3 stages to it, the last one of which most resembles the Carrington effect. It would be interesting to take a look at the tests that have actually been done, sort of inadvertently done, really, in that they didn't actually anticipate before doing this what they were going to do. But both the United States and the then Soviet Union have exploded nuclear weapons far out in space. I think it was 300 to 400 Ks out. And in both cases, they not only produced wonderful auroras in the sky. In the United States case, they shorted out the streetlights in Hawaii, and I understand there were also some effects in California. In the Soviet Union's case, there was actually an electrical transmission, a high-tension transmission line, more or less directly underneath where they exploded the weapon, in Kazakhstan, and they managed to short out the transmission line, blow up various transformers along the transmission line, and I think they set fire to a power station.
When was that?
That was in the early 60s.
The American test was called Starfish Prime.
Yeah.
1962. It was, I think, a 1.2 kilo megaton weapon. So it was a big weapon. And as the gentleman explained, they lofted the weapon off of Johnson Island, which is a small atoll about 500 miles south of Hawaii. When they blew it, it shorted out part of the Hawaiian grid. We were aware that a weapon could produce an EMP, but we had not detonated one in space. So they set up measuring systems to measure what the effect would be. It shorted out the equipment. It was 2 magnitudes higher than what they were anticipating. The Soviets, months later, do Soviet test 184, same thing. Something I think ironic here is less than a year later is the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, which banned any detonation of weapons in space or on the surface of the Earth. Part of me kind of wished we had done another test that let the public around the world see what could happen to us in the event of an EMP, but you can't do it because we're banned from blowing weapons in space. But it definitely needs a nuclear weapon. Carrington event is different. It's a solar storm with incredibly terrible effect if the storm goes above a magnet. The storms are categorized the same way as tornadoes and cyclones, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you get a 5+. We don't know how often they happen. That would blow us off the line as well.
I assume that the things they did were what we're talking at least 20, 30 years ago. And in fact, the Carrington thing was a lot longer. And presumably we're using a lot more electricity now and are much more vulnerable and much more dependent on the electric grid. I'm wondering if that makes us more vulnerable now automatically, yes. Or do we also have some improvements in the strength, or I don't know, the resilience or whatever of the grid, so that maybe it can take more than it would have been.
Yeah, I think this is one of the big lessons of any investigation into this stuff, is that it shows up just how bloody vulnerable we are and how little attention has been given to the modest technical fixes required to reduce that vulnerability.
The DOE, Department of Energy for the United States, that 5 or 10 years back, did an evaluation, and this study pointed out the average component in our electrical grid is 30 to 40 years old. We're pumping our electricity in the United States on an antiquated grid that is working just about at max power at any given time, 95% or more. We have wasted billions of dollars on, whether we support green energy or not. If only a fraction of that money had been spent on hardening certain key components of the grid, it might make a difference. We have not. We're whistling in the dark. The analogy I give, it's like you own a house, but you figure, I don't need insurance. Nobody's going to bother me. Your bank would shut you down within a day. We don't have an insurance policy for our grid, the European grid, I don't know about the Australian grid. We don't have insurance.
Zero, absolutely zero.
Yeah. So we take a rogue character. Let's say he finds out he's terminal tomorrow. Could you see him perhaps in a fit of paranoia deciding, maybe I'll take America with me? North Korea has actually produced a cartoon showing America being destroyed by an EMP while heroic music is playing. I take that serious. Yeah, that would be the equivalent of my neighbor next door is shooting a target at myself, my fiance, and my daughter and my son-in-law, and I don't pay attention to it. We have to start paying attention to some of this. And it doesn't cost all that much.
How much can be done? Let's say everybody just said, "Oh, goody! This is a chance for us to get right busy and invest in exactly something that everybody will agree on that we should do." I mean, there's not much agreement in the U.S. right now, so maybe if you could find anything that both Republicans and Democrats would say was a good idea, maybe they would invest, put a lot in it. Okay, how much does it take? How difficult is it? What would they do? I've heard the expression harden the grid.
Yeah.
Is that a term? What would you do if that's it, to harden your grid enough so that it could take whatever might be coming?
Defer to you, sir.
Well, you'd need basically to sheath everything in to sheath everything in tinfoil, in effect. Now, I mean, how you harden those long exposed power lines, I'm not sure. You would need to put interruption devices at the ends that would short out before the main power transformer blows up. Because if the main power transformer blows up, it takes 10 years to bloody well replace it. And if all the main power transformers in the country blow up at once, you're in deep shit. I mean, apart from that, communication infrastructure needs to be optical fiber rather than copper wire. It's not conceptually really complicated. It just costs a bit of money and has not been done.
The
We cell phones are one big help.
Nope,
I'm not sure how shielded your average cell phone really is.
it's the towers.
I assume that I assume that mine would probably just die.
Even if they did not, it's the cell phone towers. It's the infrastructure further up the line that is. I was at a conference, it's about 10 years back down in Albuquerque. I saw a video that was chilling. It was high tension line. They got some high tension line and they overloaded it with an EMP at Kirkland Air Force Base, where they do have an EMP generator, which generally don't think of this as a large thing. It's designed for testing planes. All right. The wires exploded. They literally exploded. These are the high tension lines. I remember a room of silence after we saw that. There was a couple hundred guys there. There was some blanks from the audience. There is the real major vulnerability, and as pointed out, putting in circuit breaking, updated, modern, nanosecond capable circuit breaking systems would be a key component. Cost $100 billion. Well, what's $100 billion?
That's still
Low.
Okay. It's 1/3 the cost of Australia's nuclear submarine program, which we
Right.
probably anyway.
Right.
Yeah, it's a lot of money, but it's kind of doable.
Again, it's an insurance policy.
Yeah.
I look at it more from the military side of things. It's a paradigm of defense and offense. Your opponent comes up with an offensive capability. You make a defense that's stronger to resist it. They make one that's even bigger. Well, it's sort of the same thing here. We can create defensive systems against EMP and also stockpiling key electrical components that could be easily switched out, which we don't have anything like that right now. Those are two ways of addressing this issue.
Yeah, I mean, when you put your mind to it, the fixes may not be perfect, but they're kind of obvious. They don't require sort of a major revolution in quantum computing or anything to do. It's just that absolutely no attention whatsoever has been given to this. And there was attention being given to this back in the 1980s. And when there was attention being given to this, then some things at least were done. Now there is nothing, and we have actually moved backwards.
I'll ask you, sir, a question. Do you think Air Force One is hardened?
I assume it must be.
We're not sure.
Well,
This is from a guy who's an expert who shouldn't have been talking about it.
yeah.
He said
If
about
Air Force
15.
One is not hardened, then that question of okay, Kim Jong Un has just taken out the entire country. If
Mhm.
Kim Jong Un has taken out the entire country, then Kim Jong Un is betting that I will not be able to transmit the retaliatory order. In other words, that I won't be able to launch the missiles that would reduce him to rubble. And the question arises, well, okay, if he really has done that, then his bet may be correct.
Let us say
You may not be able to transmit the retaliatory order, or indeed to transmit anything else, including a whole lot of things far more necessary and constructive.
I've been told, and this is not breaking classified. By the way, I do not work in anything classified. I don't want that clearance. It's a pain in the neck. I've been told 15 to 20 key aircraft are fully hardened, or what are called the looking glass aircraft, which are designed to actually fight a nuclear war from. But even if we do launch, does that change anything for us? So
No.
what? So what if we destroy our opponent? What about us? What about my daughter? What about my son-in-law? What about the kids I teach? We're all gone.
Yeah, sure. I mean, still the question arises, okay, so maybe Looking Glass, maybe the Doomsday my default assumption has been that the Doomsday Plane or the Doomsday Planes, plural, would be fully hardened.
Yes.
And I don't see any technical reason why that could not be so.
Sorry,
Let's
I haven't been paying.
how does
Just a
how
minute.
does the order then get from the Doomsday Plane to the submarine captain? At some point, if it's got to go through AT&T at some point, well, it just can't have got to go through AT&T at some point, because AT&T is gone.
You need to.
Hi, in the background.
You need to explain the term.
That's my beloved.
I want to know what the term Doomsday Plan is.
Doomsday Plane.
Plane.
The Doomsday Plane is the plane from which you conduct World War III.
Okay. All right. It's the one that's going to trigger the whole series of irreversible horrors.
Yeah. It's the big Boeing that's full of electronic equipment, which we are to assume is EMP hardened, which the president is supposed to get into when buttons get pushed.
The Doomsday Plane, it launches out of Omaha, the old headquarters for SAC, and there were several of them there. The one on the flight line, I've been on the plane. Now, they had all the equipment covered up so I couldn't figure anything out. Supposedly, the plane from alert to launch will be in the air in 2 minutes, and then can circle above the United States for a day or two. It can issue command launches to submarines via antenna. They unreel an antenna about 2 miles long.
The big trailing antenna.
Big trailing antenna. But yet again, so what? It's over. My whole idea, and from your perspective and from mine, we want to make sure this never happens. We can make sure it never happens. But it's going to take some will on the part of leadership to make sure it doesn't happen. We've been whistling in the dark for too long. So I'll ask you, ma'am.
I don't think you need to convince either either that
I think we're both convinced.
Yes.
I think that for the last 40 years, I've been working on nuclear disarmament, and so has John. But we haven't gotten anywhere. And in fact, I would say in the last month or two, it's gone backward because now we have more countries in Europe who are saying, well, we better get a nuclear weapon of our own because, we don't trust what Putin is up to. And I can't even blame them. I mean, hell, I don't know. So it's not working, dear. Start over.
Well, just a couple of days ago, Poland said they'd like to have nuclear weapons on their territory. Is that crazy?
Not. Oh, my beloved, who you just saw, is from Poland. Needless to say, she's not a fan of nuclear weapons.
Yes.
And some years back, I tried to persuade the Polish government that this was a really bad idea. Obviously, I have failed. I can understand the sense of threat that the Polish government feels. I can also understand the Ukrainian government saying, hey, look, back in the 1980s, we had 400 nuclear weapons on our soil. And if we'd hung on to them, this wouldn't be happening. What are you supposed to say to them? It's everything has indeed has lurched violently backwards since since February 22nd, 2022. And the geopolitics look more and more ugly, and also more and more crazy, and harder to get your head around. Unfortunately, the current occupant of the White House is not exactly helping.
Well, yeah, but there's only one ray of hope, which is not. I wouldn't believe it at all. But he does talk about nuclear disarmament for the first time.
Yes, he does, and that is hopeful. Yes,
but I don't know what he mixes all of that in with all these other crazy things that he's doing, so that you have to discount everything he says, even if you would love to believe that is one that you could get on to and support.
Well, ma'am, Jack Kennedy, who was definitely a cold warrior, I think said it best shortly before he was killed, in which he said, "It is not nuclear war by calculation. It is nuclear war by miscalculation or madness that I'm afraid of." And that's what I am personally afraid of. A calculated move to take us into a thermonuclear war, by its definition, is madness. Therefore, it is madness to either contemplate by calculation or the other thing. And you folks are most likely very aware of the number of times in the last 40 years where, because of one thing or another, we got pretty damn close. The Norway incident with the missile back, when was that? During Yeltsin?
That was 1995. The other one was the Colonel Stan Petrov incident, 26th of September 1983.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you recall, but midnight, it had just been a shift change, and suddenly at Sepakov 15, sirens start wailing, alarms start blaring, the big screen lights up saying that the United States has launched, but that it's only launched 5 missiles. And Colonel Stan, who was standing in for somebody else who was junior to him and would therefore have gone by the book, said, I had a feeling in my gut that there was a mistake somewhere. So he was supposed to take steps that would initiate World War III. He didn't. And it was purely because of his gut feeling that we're all still here.
Nobel Peace Prize.
Was also the launch control officer, I can't remember the year exactly, in Colorado somewhere, whose crew were practicing a launch sequence, and the launch sequence went out of control and would not stop, and turned into the real thing. He had the presence of mind to order heavy military vehicles driven directly on top of silo doors.
I never heard this one. But yes, there was a Soviet submarine during the Cuban Missile Crisis where a launch officer refused to go forward with this. That's miscalculation and madness. How much longer are we going to dodge the bullet?
Quite a few times. But anyway.
Well, God looks out for drunks, fools, and maybe all the rest of us at times, because that was too damn close.
Maybe people in launch control centers who have rather a big responsibility, which most of the time they'd rather not think about.
Mm-hmm. I worked at a SAC base for a little while, and the conversations I had with the pilots were chilling. By the nature of that base, I said, is it not obvious that the weapons you are carrying are a follow-up strike? This is about civilian targeting, Leningrad, wherever. You're going to be responsible for killing 2 to 3 million people in a matter of seconds. Well, I practice, sir, to make sure I don't have to do it, because if I don't have, and I was just like, bullshit. Right. How do you live with this night after night? That you might be called upon to do this. But, sir, I'm practicing to make sure I don't have to do it. That's a logic that gets a little chilling.
I want us to think about strategizing a little bit.
Yeah.
We have failed to get any kind of nuclear disarmament. There has, it's true that after Reykjavik, there was a lot of cutback, there's been no more cutting back, and that isn't going to get there anyway. You're not going to get it there incrementally. You're going to have some sort of major global decision on the part of a whole bunch of people. And usually a decision like that will only happen after there's already been a war and people realize that we can't do that again. I don't think we are going to want to go that route. There must be some other route, maybe some argument that will be a little more persuasive than we've been using so far. I mean, it may be that you could say we have to let's think about this EMP possibility and look at all of the options that we might consider. Tell me, if you were either of you in charge of planning, the global peace movement, what are we going to say and do next? To who?
Well, I'm going to jump into this one quick. I helped the general write his autobiography, Honor Untarnished. Now, we focused on his World War II experience. He wound up a 4-star general. He told me he attended several nuclear tests in the 40s and 50s. He said he was never so terrified. He said he was standing 8 miles away, and when the shock wave hit, he stated to me that when he was in charge of deploying what were called tactical nuclear weapons in the event of World War III, he had decided on his own he was not going to do it. General Donald B. Bennett, he was a great man. I'll tell you what my crazy idea is. I wish we would take an island somewhere as remote as possible, invite the world leaders to come and blow a 1 megaton weapon and let them see what will happen. That might start people thinking about what this is.
Well, I think this is probably not the first time that this has been suggested. I
No.
certainly think that something that would,
Shock us?
but something that would bring to the strong attention of the political class in every country exactly what nuclear weapons are about, could be desirable, but there might be the odd one who goes instead, oh, I want one of those.
Mm-hmm.
So you do have to be aware of that possibility. It is still the case that the overwhelming majority of countries, the overwhelming majority of the world's people and governments think that blowing up the world and leaving what hasn't been blown up to freeze in the dark is not a great idea. And so you do have initiatives like the Ban Treaty in particular. And I mean, I'm now preparing to go off to the UN in late April, early May, and attend the NPT PrepCom. Now, I mean, a lot of this is just the stuff that we kind of always do, but I think it's important that that is maintained and that we don't just sort of throw up our hands in despair and say, oh, well, it's all not getting anywhere. What we do about a phenomenon like Donald Trump, I just don't know. I shake my head in despair. I have no idea how to respond to a person like that. I don't know what to appeal to. I don't know where there would be buttons in him that I can press in a letter that I write.
There's a great Star Trek line from a Klingon or a Romulan who said, it took Nixon to go to China. So who knows?
Yeah, well, that could be something hopeful.
We don't know.
It could be that he comes up with an initiative that surprises us all and helps to save the planet. And I mean, there we're pretty much in the realm of prayer. I don't discount the effectiveness of prayer. I do it myself, but I think you need to work on a whole lot of fronts all at once.
He does want a Nobel Peace Prize, and if he got nuclear disarmament, I would be glad to be the first to endorse that. However, I think he probably wants to get it by taking over Gaza and make it into a spa on the Riviera instead
Don't
of
forget Greenland.
Greenland and taking over Canada, so that would have a Nobel Prize for aggression of that kind. Anyway, it's really hard to think through how to appeal to the rationality there. So I expect what we'll all do, and it is, for me, that's what I'll continue doing, is simply going on doing what I'm doing, which isn't working.
Well,
And they, if you keep doing what doesn't work, you're crazy, according to, I think that's what, isn't Einstein who said that? You expect something different to come out of it. Well, I don't think anything different is going to come out of it, but I don't know what else to do. And I don't want to give up. So, yeah.
I think we'd be in a whole lot worse situation if people like you did give up. So I'd
Yes.
strongly encourage you to do just exactly what you just said you were going to do.
Well, we're all doing that. That's what we're all doing, I think. You're going to the NPT review conference or prep
For
conference.
the end time.
Yeah, right.
Well, you
Well,
know, it's been in 5 months, we'll recognize 80 years since Hiroshima and Nagasaki in only 5 months. We've been lucky for 80 years. I don't want to think we're going to have to be lucky for another 80. So I'm urging both of you to keep doing what you're doing.
well, let's see if we can do and make any headway with your book, or it's a new book. And do you have a copy there that you can lift?
Well, the book I wrote some years back, 1 second after, that just novel. It's a novel of what happens in a small town in North Carolina where I live across a 1 year period as a massive die-off starts because of EMP. And it's a hard book. One of my main characters is a daughter who has diabetes. What happens to somebody who's a severe diabetic one? There's no medication. What happens with this, with that? And most of the town is dead a year later. It's a grim book, but I felt I had to write it.
Now, sometimes cultural things actually have more impact
Yeah.
than anything else. You think of that movie, the day TV thing or so, whatever it was, the day after.
You know, that's the only movie that has ever gotten EMP correct.
Really?
Yeah. When the weapon is detonated above Kansas City and Jason Robards is trying to drive into the town, that's the only time I've ever seen a movie that got it correct. All the cars just stop and then the other bombs start to hit.
I think we ought to show everybody Dr. Strangelove. That's the one
Oh,
that,
God, yes.
that's the one. I couldn't stay in the theater. I'd get up. I kept having to go pee because I was so scared. I was just, whoa, whoa, wow, I mean, you laugh, and yet, of course, you're laughing at what? So I think I wanted to show it to my students last time, I taught a course a few years ago, several times on public health in a nuclear age. But I made a mistake. I didn't get them together to watch Dr. Strangelove. I think that's probably the one that will do it. If anything, will
There's a
awaken
British
the
movie
masses.
made. There's
Well,
a British movie.
Dr. Strangelove gives you accidental nuclear war.
What's the British movie? It was made in 1984.
Oh, Threads. Oh, that is
Threads. Threads.
unbelievably grim. Yeah, a nuclear warhead explodes above Sheffield, which is
Yes.
kind of like Pittsburgh, and it's horrible.
It should be shown because I've shown that one to my students.
Yeah. It is a brilliant movie.
What are you teaching? Are you, Bill?
Yes, I'm still teaching this semester. I'm teaching a history of technology.
Okay, what happens when you tell your students what you've shared with us? What do they think? Well, are your students? I've heard that right now. In fact, I was looking at polls. The young men in the U.S., young males, not women, but young males, are going to be something else again. They are really very, very reactionary, very everything that Trump says. They're really the most enthusiastic supporters of Trump now. And it's, I don't know why, and the pollsters don't know why either. They can't figure it out, and they're really scared. But are you finding your students are?
No, not necessarily, because it's Montreat is a Presbyterian Christian college.
Uh-huh.
So the kids get exposed to a lot of diverse views. And yeah, I would have to say there are some of my students who are reactionary, but there's a hell of a lot of other kids who really want to hear differing views. And that's what I try to do. The last thing I'll tolerate in my class is a dogmatic view without facts, which is kind of hard to do sometimes. That's why I show Threads to scare the hell out of them.
Yeah, it does. It works. Huh?
Oh, it does.
Well, maybe that's what we are.
Show the day after as well.
Yes.
give them a feast of doomsday movies.
Time's
That'll
up,
be an
guys. We've done it. We've done all we can do on this, but it's fascinating, and I'm so glad you're doing what you're doing, and calling the world's attention to these catastrophes that are around us. So, anything you have? Anybody? One last word you want to throw in before I say goodbye?
Well, I want to say hello to his wife.
She
Was there a moment ago?
Okay.
No, she was just getting a cup of tea. I think it's important to retain a sense of hope. It can be at times a little difficult, but nonetheless, I think that plugging on is also important. It may be that if you didn't plug on, things would be one whole hell of a lot worse than if you keep on doing what you're doing. So I'd strongly encourage at least keeping doing what we're doing. I don't have any magic formula. I don't think anybody does.
Yeah, well, that's depressing last sentence in their conversation, but I think it's probably the best we could do, and it is realistic. Thank you both.
That it has been.
I appreciate this, and I can say I've enjoyed it even.
Well,
So-
I hope we meet again with your Swedish friend as well, because this has been one of the greatest conversations I've had in some time. So I really appreciate it.
Share it around, push it.
Same Aaron was here. He's missed a really great conversation.
Thank you, guys. Okay, bye-bye.
God bless you.
Bye-bye.
God bless.